On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Mats Zuccarello's report card for 2023-2024 and some splits in his numbers you have to see to believe.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will dive into Mats Zuccarello's 2023-2024 report card. We'll take a look at some pretty glaring splits for his numbers and look at what will happen next year. Where will he be in the lineup? What needs to happen for Zuccarello to bounce back to his form over the last couple of seasons? My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and it was a season of change for Mats Zuccarello this past season. One constant that we have known since Zuccarello and Kirill Kaprizov played together is that they have been inseparable on the top line for the Wild over the last few years, up until John Hynes took over. And this season, for the first time consistently, we saw Kirill Kaprizov and Mats Zuccarello, at least in even strength, occupy different scoring lines. And that led to some pretty surprising splits for Zuccarello's production this year. All told, Zuccarello played in 69 games this year. He had 12 goals, 51 assists, 63 total points. Had 7 even-strength goals, 5 power play goals, 23 even-strength assists, 28 power play assists. He had 173 shots on goal, shot 6.9% on the season, played just under 19 minutes per game of ice time, 50 blocks, 26 hits, 38 takeaways, 38 giveaways. Now, let's look at where those numbers rank in a scoring capacity throughout Zuccarello's career. The 12 goals was the fewest that he's had in a season since 2020, 2021. The 51 assists is 4 off of his career high, which was set 2 years ago. The 63 points is the third most that he has had in a season. And so the overall numbers, with the exception of the dip in goals, the overall numbers pretty on par with what we've seen over the last couple of seasons from Zuccarello. The 6.9% shooting percentage is one of the lower marks that he's had in the season. 173 shots. It's a dip from last year, but it's up from 2 seasons ago. And so Zuccarello just was not scoring at the same clip from a goals perspective. But I think the one that is the most eye-opening for me is the fact that of Zuccarello's 63 points, 33 of those came on the power play. What does that tell you? Because Zuccarello and Kirill Kaprizov occupy the top power play unit for the Minnesota Wild. And so getting the opportunity to still capitalize on that chemistry helped keep Mats Zuccarello's numbers afloat, because listen to this. We used this as a benchmark with Denny's show last night. The February 7th date when Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, and Joel Eriksson Ek were put onto the same line for the first time, really full time. From that point to the end of the season, April 18th, in 29 games, Mats Zuccarello had 4 goals, 20 assists. So he had 24 points in 29 games, which was 4th on the team. But let's look at the even strength scoring. Zuccarello in those 29 games, just 2 even strength goals and 11 even strength points. That was tied in that same time frame with Mats Zuccarello and was 2 points and 4 goals less than Jonas Brodin. It was 3 goals and 3 points less than Ryan Hartman. And so you have a guy in Zuccarello who is playing exclusively second line minutes down the stretch and just was not able to consistently help out Kirill and Boldy and Eriksson Ek. Now, it wasn't all on him, because what do we know about Mats Zuccarello is he is more of a passer than a scorer. And so these numbers may even be more of an indictment on Marcus Johansson, because you've got Marco Rossi as your second line center. He had 7 goals in the final 33 games at even strength and 9 total points in those final 33 games. So he had 9 points. Zuccarello had 11 points. Johansson had 4 at even strength. So that combination just did not work for the Wild down the stretch. And for a Minnesota team that was trying like crazy to make the postseason, one of the big reasons that they didn't get there was because the second line was just not capable of consistently helping the top line. And the Wild became a 1 scoring line team. And that's, from an opponent's perspective, is pretty easy to scheme against. You throw everything you have at 1 scoring line, and you just say, we're just going to take our chances with the other lines beating us. And by and large, the other lines were not able to consistently do that. Let's look at some of the peripheral numbers for Mats Zuccarello, because the one that stands out to me, we talk about the Corsi for percentage, and Corsi events are basically, events that lead to goals, whether it be shots or a couple of other metrics as well. The higher the percentage, the more often your team has the puck when a particular player is on the ice. Mats Zuccarello's Corsi for percentage in full seasons that he's played was the best it's ever been. 62.3%. That is a career high for Zuccarello. The only times he has ever beaten that are for shortened stints of seasons, such as the Dallas Stars and some of his early days with the New York Rangers. So the 62.3 Corsi for percentage was the highest that it's ever been throughout his career, which is an interesting kind of counterpoint to some of the issues that the second line had in scoring. Tells you that they were still possessing the puck quite a bit, just not able to bury their chances. The 2.1 assists per 60 minutes were a career high in a full season for Mats Zuccarello, and his 2.9 points per 60, just 0.1 off of the number that he set a couple of seasons ago. Now, some of the other numbers as well. Let's go to point shares. Point shares are the individual number of points that a player contributes to the overall standings. Zuccarello was worth 3.6 offensive point shares this season, which was a dip from 4.2 last year and 6.4 the year before. Defensive point shares, he was at 1.3, and so his total amount is 4.9 for the season, which ranks him 8th on the team behind Marc-Andre Fleury, Jonas Brodin, Philip Gustafsson, Brock Faber, Joel Eriksson Ek, Matt Boldy, Kirill Kaprizov. So all of those numbers suggesting that while the even strength scoring struggled, that the dip wasn't as egregious as it may seem. Now, Zuccarello was a had an expected goals for of 39.1. That's down from the last 2 seasons, but again, that speaks to just the inability to finish on that second line. The expected goals against was actually the lowest it's been over the last 3 seasons, and the lowest figure that Zuccarello has had since 2020, 2021. Only played 42 games that year, but 30.8 back in 2019, 2020. So the defensive numbers with a little bit of a bump, the offensive numbers struggling. Again, because they're just you're playing with 2 pieces on a line as opposed to, a legitimate 3-line attack. Now, as far as grades go, let's take a look at how things graded out for Mats Zuccarello. We'll take your comments, and we will look at what needs to change or what needs to happen to help Mats Zuccarello, both from his standpoint and from the team's standpoint, to help him be able to bounce back to being more of a consistent contributor. What does life after Kirill Kaprizov on his line look like? We'll talk about all that as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, what's left of these Stanley Cup finals. And before you know it, football will also be here as well. And you can bet on all of it on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $200 in bonus bets you can use to bet on everything from the finals MVP, or in this case, the Conn Smythe, to who is going to hit one out of the ballpark. For those that listen to Locked on NHL, I have teased for in states you can, using the Colorado Rockies and the Chicago White Sox as a way to pretty easily hit on that $5 bet. Just looked, they are crushing the Dodgers. So apologies for anybody that used that method here today. I still feel like that is the good route to go. And then you win that $5 bet, and you are free rolling with $200 in bonus bets for as long as that will take you. So in states where you are able to legally gamble, head to FanDuel.com/locked-on and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For tomorrow's show, we're going to take a look at a few more draft profiles. We'll also get some thoughts on the pick that I made for the Locked on NHL mock draft. Locked on NHL prospects gave us some thoughts on Anton Salayev, who I selected at 13. So we'll hear those, as well as taking a look at a few other players that could potentially be there at 13 for the Minnesota Wild. Hard to believe the draft is already next week. We are finalizing plans for how coverage will go. I know in the past I have done quite a bit with the Soda Pod for their draft stream. I believe that is it's the route we're headed again this year. So I'll keep you posted as that gets shored up here over the rest of the week. But wanted to take a look at some of the comments for Mats Zuccarello's 2023-2024 season. And also wanted to throw out the listener question here for today's episode. So today's question: what line does Mats Zuccarello play on in 2024-2025? Do you think he sticks on the second line? Do you think he plays on the third line? Do you think he plays lower in the lineup than that or higher? Where do you think Mats Zuccarello slots in to the lineup for 2024-2025? Best response leads off the show tomorrow. So let's get to the comments for Zuccarello here for today. We did put the Twitter and YouTube comments out, to the polls out to allow you the opportunity to vote. And on Twitter, 51 total votes for Mats Zuccarello's season grade. 54.9% of the votes said C, 3.9% said A, 29.4% said B, and 11.8% said D or F. On the YouTube side, we had 105 votes. 4% said A, 33% said B, 50% said C, 12% said D, and 1% of the vote said F. Here are the comments. MPH650 said Zuccarello gets a 7.3 out of 10. So right around that C range. Tyler Bach saying flat C. Did exactly what was expected. Zucchi had ups and downs this year. Obviously, Mojo didn't help him. Think he can be a solid line 2 and power play contributor. Line 1 is solidified without him. Let's get some support around him and Rossi. Hard to argue with that. And so the let's keep in mind, we're going to do this as we go forward. Let's keep in mind the expectations coming into the season. So coming into the year, the expectation was that him and Kirill were going to hold the fort on that top line. And through struggles in the early part of the season, through injuries to Zuccarello and Kaprizov, that's not how things ended. And so Zuccarello ended up being a pretty solid, pretty locked in member of the second line. We talked about the scoring and the big splits in even strength and power play scoring. And so I think considering what we thought Zuccarello was going to give us, which was right around what he had done over the last couple of seasons, a 20-goal guy that can get you right around 60 or 70 points, he didn't hit those numbers. And he was, while it may not be entirely his fault, he was part of a second line that just did not consistently get it done. So that's going to factor into the grading here that I will be handing out. On a scale of 1 to 5, offensively, I'm going to go with a 3. I'm going to go 2.5. 2.5 out of 5 because even strength was just not great. Zuccarello is just not great even strength. And so he's getting a bump because the overall line was not able to get it done. On the defensive side, the defensive numbers actually improved for Zuccarello this year compared to where he's been at over the previous couple of seasons. I think that probably has a lot to do with him and Kaprizov being separated because, let's be honest, the Kaprizov-Zuccarello lines have not typically been strong defensively. And I think Marco Rossi definitely helped in that department as the season played out. So I'm going to give Zuccarello a 3 out of 5 on the defensive side. And on special teams, considering that Zuccarello only plays on the power play, considering that, yes, it was a power play that was inconsistent throughout the season, but overall, the numbers were good, and he was, I believe, 4th on the team in specialty in power play points. I'm giving him a 4 out of 5 on special teams. Now, I still believe that Zuccarello is kind of a unsung leader on this team. He is not necessarily looked on to kind of lead the way, but he has been pretty outspoken over the last couple of seasons when things have not gone according to plan. In like the third closed door meeting of the season this past year, he was evidently very vocal in airing out frustrations with how particular players on the team were going about their business. So that's the kind of stuff that you like to see. And then Zuccarello was very critical of himself in the exit interviews, saying that he is going to, and this, we'll get into this a little bit with kind of the life after Kaprizov side of things, was pretty critical on his own performance, that he was going to need to shoot more than he ever has to become a threat from a goal scoring perspective, as opposed to somebody that just is more of a a pass first guy. And so it's all the stuff that you want to hear, but executing on it is what it really comes down to. And so if we're going with a grade for Mats Zuccarello, I'm going to lean, spoiler alert, and probably not a shock to anybody, I'm going to lean a little bit on the tougher side of the grading scale. I'm going a C- for Zuccarello because that second line was critical for the Wild down the stretch, and it did not measure up. They did not get the job done from a scoring perspective. Yes, I am going to make sure to hold Marcus Johansson accountable for his performance too. So I'm going C- for Mats Zuccarello, and this leads us to a really interesting part of the equation here as to, like, is this just who Mats Zuccarello is? Or is there a way that he can get back to the numbers he's put up over the last couple of seasons without Kirill Kaprizov as his primary line mate? Because on the power play that Zuccarello and Kaprizov are still going to get that time together. So there's still going to be opportunities for those passes and those points. But what do we do about the even strength? We will talk about that as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Policy Genius. Folks, the world of life insurance can be daunting for those that know what they're looking for. Just imagine if you're not sure what you need for coverage and you want to make sure that your family is properly covered. A lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family easy and quick. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. Policygenius.com. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we've got some draft profiles coming up for you tomorrow on Locked On Wild. And a reminder, Sunday at noon, we'll be putting Denny in the GM's chair for our next edition of Locked On Wild Live. So make sure to tune in for that coming up at noon on Sunday. We will give Denny the opportunity to make some moves, see what he would do if he were in the GM's chair. So this is a big question going forward because all of the players that have been given extensions and as a result, trade protection, although on the Zuccarello side, he gets the no move by virtue of being over 35. So his may not have been given, but he still has one. What do we do? Because the splits speak for themselves. And 11 even strength points in the final 29 games of the season is not what we need for a team that has playoff aspirations next year. And so I think it all comes down to a couple of things. Number one, line construction. By having these elements on the second line as it stands right now, and we talked about it last night about the potential options to put into the lineup, and for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to operate on two different possibilities. if Mats Zuccarello can get back to his production over the last couple of seasons, he probably stays on the second line. And so by having him with Marco Rossi, you have Marco Rossi, who is very good at getting to the net. You have Mats Zuccarello, who is a pass-first guy. You have to have somebody on that line that can make some plays. You have to have somebody that is capable of letting it rip and finding the back of the net, because we saw it pretty much all season. Marcus Johansson just is not, he's not a shooter. He is a guy that just kind of skates around. And that did nobody any favors on that second line. And so you need to have somebody in that third spot on that line that is capable of shooting at a high percentage and is capable of actually scoring. So that's one side. That is one way that by Zuccarello setting up both Rossi and whoever else is the third on that line. But Zuccarello said it himself. He needs to be more aggressive with his shots and with getting to the net. This has been a common refrain, especially on the power play, is that this team, by and large, has had many instances in which they are looking more to pass than they are to shoot. And so if Zuccarello, I look at the numbers, and he had 198 shots on goal last season in 78 games. He shot 11.1%. The year before that, 2021, 2022, he had 159 shots on goal and shot 15.1%. Now, even if he could get to 11.1 or 11 or 12%, if he can get back to finishing at a better rate than he did this past season, and let's just say that he gets to the 190 shot mark. If you shoot 12% there, then that would leave him with 22 goals. So finishing is something that needs to improve for Zuccarello to get those numbers back on track, and so that he can, avoid being in the category of players that it seems like are trending downhill. Because that's the other thing. Zuccarello is 36. And so it may not be, it could be that he just took some time to adjust to not having Kirill on his line. But at some point, all players get to a particular age and their skills start to fall off. Hopefully that is not the case here, but this is partially on the line construction, but it is also partially on Zuccarello to heed his own advice and to just shoot the puck more. Any of those instances in which he's kind of analyzing and trying to find, that thread the needle type pass, just try to tuck it in top shelf. Just aim for that spot and just try to tuck one in right off the mask of the goalie. That's how you get your numbers back. And so, yes, it was an inconsistent season for Zuccarello, to say the least. But honestly, get in line. He wasn't the only one that fell into that mold. Now, we're going to do this for the rest of these throughout the offseason, but a great question to kind of wrap this all up together. Where does Mats Zuccarello find himself on a legitimate contender? And I would say, just based off of kind of what we know about the pieces of this team, seem to work a little better by extension of having Kirill Kaprizov setting them up, and by setting Kirill Kaprizov up themselves, I'd say Zuccarello is a middle six guy, probably more like a third line guy on a legitimate contender. But I think with the right line mates with him, I think he could still be a second line guy on a playoff team. That again is dependent on whether this is just Father Time saying, hey, the bill has come due, or if you put a playmaker on that line, things will even out. Because the other side of this coin is if Zuccarello's scoring does not improve, like if it stays inconsistent and mostly just linked to power play time, then you might have to have the conversation about who does he pair with on the third line. So this is going to be a big one for Zuccarello to see if he can kind of regain some of the form, or if this is just kind of who he is without 97 as a line mate. So we will we'll see what happens with Zucky, but all in all, he had some good moments this year, but just that stretch down the stretch from February 7th to the end of the season, that was tough. And I'm anxiously looking to see if he rebounds from that in 2024, 2025. That will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, reminder for you, our next live show will be Sunday at noon. Denny will be hopping into the GM's chair to take a look at how the roster should be constructed, what he would do as GM with this roster. So that should be a fun one. Sunday at noon. Reminder, we'll have an episode for you coming up tomorrow. A few more draft profiles for you, and then we'll get a playlist going of all the different draft profiles that we've done in anticipation of the draft next week. So stay tuned. We, of course, will keep an eye out for any Minnesota Wild news that should be passed along as well. All of that coming up for you here throughout the rest of the offseason on Locked On Wild. So hit the like button or subscribe on your favorite audio platforms, wherever you listen, whether it's on your phone, on your laptop, in the car, or on the couch, on your TV. We appreciate having you along for the ride, and appreciate all the support from everybody listening, no matter where you're at on the globe as well. Locked On Wild has new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.